The Magical Toy Shop. Part 1. I remember the day I met Father Christmas, she told them, cupping a mug of hot cocoa in her hands. The children sat cross-legged on the lounge carpet, enthralled by their mother's story, each wearing a chocolate-coloured moustache. "Did you? Really?" asked Mary. "I did. I really do believe I did." "Do you think that we'll meet him?" Charlotte said. "I suppose it's always possible." Their mother smiled. Arthur and Catherine, the two eldest children, looked at one another with knowing smiles of their own. It was a story they had all heard before, but, since it had become something of a family tradition, each still played their part, asking the right questions at the right time and providing the appropriate amount of oohs and ahs. It had almost become the Partridge family Christmas pantomime. Their mother went on to recount once again the tale of what had happened when she had been a little girl. One afternoon, on the day before Christmas Eve, an elderly gentleman came calling at the modest wooden house where she lived with her mother and father. He arrived seemingly from nowhere, had a bushy white beard and brought with him promises that he could arrange for the young Madeline to have any kind of adventure she chose. "Why did he come to visit you?" Charlotte asked. "He said," Madeline replied, "that he was visiting all the children in the world who weren't going to be receiving any presents that year. Remember when I told you that Grandfather and Grammy had very little money in those days?" Charlotte nodded, sipping again from her mug. "Well, that's why he came to see me. It didn't matter, not having any presents, because the three of us were very happy, and I was cared for and looked after, and everything was just lovely, but still, that's why he came." "And what was your adventure?" Mary asked. "Well, first I had to choose a gift from a huge sack he had left just outside the back door. I decided that I would like to have a spinning top, since I thought that would be rather fun. And so, he dug around in the sack and pulled out a beautiful striped spinning top and passed it to me, making me promise that I wouldn't tell anyone about his visit and that I would always remember that day." "But you're telling us," Charlotte said in a whisper, looking around in case anyone else was listening. "I think," Madeline said, "he meant I shouldn't tell anyone all that time ago, when I was still a little girl, just like you are now." Then, as they slowly finished their mugs of cocoa, Madeline told them all about the wonderful adventure she had been on, all the things she had seen and all the places she had been. When she had finished, she collected all the mugs, took them to the kitchen, and then returned with their coats, hats and scarves. "We all know what day it is today, don't we?" "Yes, Mother," the children replied in unison. "Well, are you ready?" It was the second part of their tradition. Every year on the day before Christmas Eve, they would all go into the town so that they could buy anything extra that they needed for Christmas, anything they had forgotten, and any special treats they might find. And so, bundled against the cold air, thin wisps of snow dancing in the breeze around them, they made the short walk into town and began looking excitedly in the shop windows, aflame with glowing electric lights and colourful boxes and packets. It was only when they had reached the end of the main street, Charlotte having bought a copy of the Strand magazine, since she loved the children's stories inside, while Arthur found a miniature dolly to give to Mary from one of the narrow side street shops, that Madeline brought the party to a halt. There, close to the opening of the town park, that even in winter was a lovely place to visit, with its lights and decorations and ice skating on the pond, was something she had never seen before. As if it had sprung from the ground, an overnight December bloom, there was a gigantic, brightly illuminated and extremely modern-looking new shop. More than a shop, really. It was like an arcade or department store, such was its size and splendour. "Where on earth did that come from?" Arthur asked, echoing his mother's thoughts. She shook her head, staring at the building, Mary and Charlotte tugging at her hands so she would hurry along. They had no concern of what it was. They just knew it was vibrant and exciting, and a place they simply had to investigate. "Let's go in," Mary said. Madeline was hesitant, although she couldn't deny that she was intrigued. "I don't understand," she said quietly, as much to herself as to the children. "How could something like this just suddenly appear from nowhere?" "Shall we go in?" Catherine asked, sounding nervous but at the same time rather excited. Madeline looked around at the other shoppers passing by with their bags and packages. None of them seemed to notice the brilliant new shop, instead hurrying past as the day slipped into twilight and the snow began to fall with a little more purpose. "Please," Mary and Charlotte said together, still pulling at their mother's hands and looking up at her imploringly. "Oh, very well," Madeleine agreed, deciding that it would be interesting to have a look around inside. The nearer they got to it, the clearer it became that it was one giant, enormous toy shop. And not just any toy shop, but one that was filled with the most fantastic and captivating toys. Pausing to look in the windows, they saw models of farmyards where the diminutive animals were walking around, cows and sheep grazing, chickens in their coop, while the tiny people in dolls' houses were going about their evening business, the gentlemen sitting in the study reading, the staff working in the kitchen. Small hot air balloons floated around the space above, and a light dusting of snow was falling from invisible clouds upon an extremely detailed model of their own town centre. Madeleine and the children were thunderstruck. What kind of magic was this, she wondered? Surely it must all be some amazing feat of engineering and trickery, but whatever it was the most breathtaking thing any of them had ever seen. "I could stay in here for hours," Charlotte gushed, moving to the door and looking to her mother for permission to go inside. "Go on then," Madeleine smiled, and Charlotte pushed open the door, its bell tinkling a Merry Christmas tune, and the other children followed her inside. By the time Madeleine had gone through the door, the children had already scattered to several places around the shop, which somehow seemed to be even bigger on the inside than its exterior suggested. It was very bright, very colourful, and gloriously warm and inviting, with the sounds of carols coming from some unseen choir. Strangely, however, it appeared that they were the only people in the whole building until, well, Madeleine could have been knocked down with a Christmas feather. "Hello there," came a voice from the other side of the shop. Madeleine could not believe her eyes. It surely couldn't be. It's you," she whispered. "But it can't be you." "Indeed it is, and as a matter of fact it can. Depending, that is, on who it is you think I am." It was Father Christmas. Father Christmas was standing right beside her in this amazing, fantastic toy shop. Of course, it wasn't really Father Christmas, Madeleine assured herself. It couldn't be. But it was the kindly old man who had visited her when she had been a little girl. She was certain of that, even though he looked barely a day older. The elderly gentleman with the bushy white beard who visited all the children who were not quite as fortunate as others might have been, who had an enormous sack filled with magical presents, and who had presented her with a beautiful spinning top that had sent her off on a magical adventure. "It's you, even though it can't be you," she exclaimed, then felt embarrassed at what she was saying. The man smiled, his eyes twinkling beneath the brilliant coloured lights that lined the ceiling of the shop. "So, you do remember me?" he asked. "From back when you were just a small child. Oh, what fun you had with your spinning top." "But how can it be you?" Madeleine asked. "That was over 25 years ago, and you look just the same now as you did back then." He smiled again, and as though there would never be any other explanation necessary, he said simply, "It's Christmas." Madeleine took a step back and then, remembering the children who had dispersed out of sight, disappearing amongst the shelves and displays, quickly glanced around the shop to make sure they were all right. "They're all absolutely tickety-boo," the man said, moving a chair across the room for Madeleine. "You look as though you might be able to use this, my dear," he continued, bringing another chair for himself so that he could sit next to her. "Now," he began, "before anything else, I do insist that you call me Nicholas. And please try not to look so concerned. Only good things happen in places such as this, where happiness and joy know no bounds." "Am I dreaming?" Madeleine asked. "I mean, sometimes I used to have dreams about you when I was a child. I had even wondered if it had all been a dream, and that we had never really met." "No," Nicholas laughed, shaking his head. "No, it's not a dream. This is more of, well, what would you call it? A check-in, I suppose. I do like to see how all the children I met are getting on." Madeleine was still struggling to come to terms with what was happening, trying to decide if she could, in fact, trust what she was seeing. Was it really possible for an enormous, enchanted shop such as this to suddenly appear from nowhere, Could this charming and cheerful man with whom she was now talking really be the same person as the one she met a quarter of a century ago? Yes, Nicholas said, as though he could hear her thoughts. Yes, it can all be possible, just as anything can be possible at this wonderful, magical time of year. He shifted on his chair, and then, smiling, he went on, "Now, I know you remember the exciting adventure you had with the spinning top, and how much you loved it, and so, with your permission, I would like to offer Arthur, Catherine, Charlotte and Mary the same opportunity." "Oh, I'm not sure," Madeline replied, frowning. "I promise," Nicholas assured her, "that no more harm will come to them than ever came to you. All it will do is enrich their imagination, perhaps teach them something, and give them an exciting adventure that they will always remember. So please, what do you say? Won't you let them choose a toy and then have an adventure of their own?" Madeline thought for a few moments longer, and then, unable to see what harm it could do, she agreed. "Then, if you wouldn't mind," Nicholas said, "would you please call them over so that I might explain everything to them?" Madeline agreed, calling out to the children to join them, and not particularly quickly since they were obviously all very busy. They appeared from all corners of the shop, each looking as though they were having a most excellent time. "Oh, Mummy," Mary said as she came closer. "They have musical boxes that will play any tune you ask for, and dollies with outfits that completely change, and they have tiny little ponies that you can fit in your hand, and they run around this tiny little field, and they have—" "Shh," Madeline smiled, holding her finger to her lips. "That all sounds absolutely wonderful, and you can go and see them all and everything else again in a minute. But first, this is Nicholas, so say hello to him." The children all said hello, looking from him to their mother with slightly quizzical expressions. "Now," Madeline continued, "you remember when I told you about the adventure I had with the spinning top? Well, Nicholas has very kindly said that you can choose any toy you would like from the shop." Children turned as one towards the door at the other side of the shop, covered with a purple curtain of shimmering silver and gold stars that was swaying very gently, as though there was an open window just behind it. "As soon as you find the toy that you want most of all," Nicholas said, "the toy that has called out to you and only you must simply bring it down to the door we've just seen, and I shall be able to arrange something special for you. Do you all understand?" The children nodded, their eagerness to return to the shelves and the cupboards and display stands clear to see. "Well," Nicholas said, "off you go then. Take your time. There's absolutely no rush since the passage of time inside this magical shop is not quite the same as it is outside of it. Just be sure that you are sure you have the right toy, and I shall see you behind the curtain with the stars when you are ready." They turned their eyes to Madeline and, as she nodded that it was all right, they dashed back down the shop, looking from side to side, laughing and bouncing and dancing as they went. "Well, shall we?" Nicholas asked, holding out his hand to assist Madeline from her chair. "Let me take you down to the doorway with the stars, where we can wait for them all to bring us what they find." The Magical Toy Shop. Part 2. Arthur. Nicholas pulled back the curtain with the shimmering stars and indicated for Madeline to go through the doorway. Already she had lost sight of the children, who were no doubt down one of the corridors that reached out from the main shop, or in one of the several rooms that ran down either side, filled with large inflatable toys and all kinds of other objects. As she went through the doorway, Madeline gasped. The room was vast, a seemingly never-ending space with a domed ceiling that resembled the night sky, adorned with hundreds of thousands of twinkling stars and planets, and comets that raced across the dark canvas, leaving long silver tails in their wake. "What is this place?" she asked. Nicholas was busy with something a few feet away, but looked over to reply rather casually. "Oh, this is where the magic happens. I don't suppose you remember anything like this from when you were a child?" Madeline shook her head, still looking around. "That's good," Nicholas said. "They won't remember it either. This isn't the important part. This is just, what should we say? The launch pad. Yes, let's call it that." "Launch pad?" Madeline repeated. "What on earth is a—" Before she could finish her question, they heard Arthur calling for her from the other side of the curtain. "Ah, well, now I must ask you to leave if you wouldn't mind," Nicholas said, finishing whatever it was he had been doing. You may, of course, wait just outside, but from now on, until they have all completed their adventure, this is a place just for myself and for the children. It's nothing to be concerned about. It's just that the magic simply cannot happen if any grown-ups are around." "But you are a grown-up," Madeleine said. "Yes, well," he replied, "I don't really count, not in this respect. As you might say, even the greatest orchestra still requires its conductor. So, please, if you would." He motioned for Madeleine to leave, and with a flash of light as she pulled back the curtain, suddenly she found herself back at the chairs where she had been sitting with Nicholas after they first arrived at the shop, just able to see Arthur passing through the curtain at the other end of the room. He had chosen a simple wooden sledge, varnished and shining with painted red stripes along its sides. Despite there being so very many options throughout the shop, so many interesting and miraculous objects that briefly courted his attention, Arthur was a child much like his father, a reserved and considered person who preferred the utilitarian over the flamboyant. He was not one for taking chances, for rocking the boat, and had always seemed happiest at home, safe and secure. With the sledge under his arm, he pushed the curtain aside and then, before he had a chance to blink, everything was consumed by a bright white light and, to his utter amazement, he found himself standing at the top of a very tall hill, surrounded by a wintry countryside. All around him, in every direction he looked, were snow-covered fields and rolling peaks, the whole area bordered by gigantic fir trees. "Mother?" he said tentatively, hoping that there was some way she would suddenly appear. He knew, however, that he was alone. Completely alone. The snow lay pure and perfectly undisturbed as far as he could see. Enormous swathes of smooth, brilliant white surfaces that could well have been there, flawless and untrodden, for hundreds of years. "Mr. Nicholas," he tried, wondering if his mother's friend might be able to help, to explain what was happening, but again there came no reply. He placed the sledge on the ground, looked around again, and then, thinking it the best and only option available to him, he sat upon it and launched himself down the hill. Surprised at how quickly the sledge picked up speed, Arthur closed his eyes as he rushed across the snow. The sledge reached the bottom of the hill much sooner than he had imagined, and, as he opened his eyes again, he saw that it was already climbing another hill as though travelling on tracks, pulled along by invisible chains. It reached the top, turned slightly, and then down he went again. He looked at the clear blue sky above, and at times, as the sledge continued to fall and rise from one hill to the next with startling alacrity, he felt as though he had only to reach up his hands to be able to touch it. It was exhilarating. It was scintillating. It was a blast of thrilling sensations the likes of which he had never experienced before, and he was finding that he loved every second of it. Still the sledge zipped across the snow, to the very edge of the trees, and then back again, zooming past the brow of the first hill he had descended before changing direction and heading off down another. He could not believe it, could not understand why he felt no fear, why he was not the least bit concerned. He had completely let go of not only his initial worries about where he was and what was going to happen to him, but he found that he was now also unbound from the many other small problems and issues that he would let get the better of him in his normal, day-to-day life. He saw now that agonizing about all of the minor, insignificant things that would sometimes affect him were not worth his anxieties, that there were more important things in life. He had, indeed, never felt so free, had never felt such a magnificent release. "This is fantastic," he shouted, thinking to himself that he wished he had felt this way so much earlier. Then he heard Nicholas's voice. "Doesn't it feel good to let yourself be free?" he asked. "Doesn't it feel so terrifically liberating?" "It does!" shouted Arthur, not in the least bit concerned about where the voice was coming from. "It is important to remember," Nicholas's voice went on as, at last, the sledge turned towards the spot where Arthur had first climbed upon it, gradually slowing down as it climbed the hill. "That sometimes just letting yourself go, forgetting all your cares, and just enjoying the life you live and the experiences you have, appreciating each and every moment, is the best thing you can do. Time can be short, so always remember to think about what is important, understand all you have, and cast aside the small, trifling things that do not matter in the slightest. Things I think you will find will turn out to be all right. Clouds will always clear. Hope will always flourish. There is never any problem that cannot be overcome. You have everything before you, young Arthur, so always remember to allow yourself to be free. The sledge came to a halt at the top of the hill, and Arthur, breathing deeply, the clean, crisp air resonating within him, stood and looked around again. It was a beautiful scene. The snow once more returned to its pristine state, the sky clear and wonderful, the endless possibilities of life now opening up before him. He would take more chances, he decided. He would live with as much freedom as he could, not allowing himself to become shackled by the trivial, pointless things that once had kept him so restrained. There came another flash of light, and then, without knowing exactly why or how, and not pausing to look for an explanation because he understood not everything needs a reason, he found himself back in the toy shop once more. The magical toy shop. Part 3. Catherine. Catherine heard Nicholas call her name and, holding the small musical carousel she had found on one of the shelves, complete with tiny horses and a mechanism that, when wound by its little key, would send the roundabout spinning, the horses bobbing up and down as tinkling bells played, "O come all ye faithful." She slowly pushed past the curtain of shimmering stars, wondering if her mother was somewhere behind it. At that moment, a flash of light erupted in the darkness, and suddenly she was no longer in the toy shop, but was, instead, standing at the centre of a huge and noisy Christmas funfair. Although just 12 years old, a year younger than her brother Arthur, she had always been blessed with a strong sense of independence and fearlessness. She would be the first of the children to investigate new and perilous places whenever they were out playing in the woods, or she would dive straight into the river they often swam in during the summer, regardless of how cold the day might be, even if it happened to be December. Even though her mother would often tell her to take more care, that she should think about things more prudently, still Catherine would rush into things without considering her safety. And so, suddenly finding herself removed from the toy shop, relocated in this bustling fairground, did not bring her a feeling of confusion or trepidation, but one of excitement and curiosity. She had no idea where she was. All she knew was that wherever she looked, she saw rides and stalls and flashing electric lights. There were Christmas decorations everywhere, wreaths and shining tinsel, trees filled to bursting with lights and ornaments and garlands. Clowns passed by, waving and smiling as they mingled with the crowds. A man walking on a very tall pair of stilts bent down towards her and said hello. As she walked, her attention was distracted by a cheerful man at a hoopla stall, while another asked if she would like a hot donut or an oversized pretzel. The only thing that she was concerned about was that she had lost the small musical carousel she was holding as she passed through the curtain in the toy shop. Trying to remember where she had last seen it, she heard someone say her name. "Over here," someone called. "Catherine, over here." Wondering who it could be, she followed the voice through the mass of people who were all smiling and laughing, eating roast chestnuts and carrying enormous stuffed toys. "Catherine," the voice continued, and she went on, past another of the Christmas trees, this one wrapped in wonderful garlands of dazzling silver stars. Finding spaces between the mass of people, she soon came to a less crowded area, with a large razzle-dazzle ride to her left, its platform rising and tilting while happily screaming people held onto it, and a swinging pirate ship to her right. And then, as the throng thinned even further, she saw a short way ahead a wonderful glistening carousel, its lights flashing, the horses slowly turning as bells and pipes sounded Christmas carols. It was, she thought, just like the one she had found in the toy shop, and she simply couldn't wait to have a ride on it. But then she noticed something strange. All of the other rides, all the stalls and everywhere else she looked were so busy, so chock full of people, but this beautiful carousel, with its horses painted pink and gold, sparkling tinsel around their necks, was completely empty. It made no sense to her. She couldn't see what it was about it that nobody seemed interested in. Then she noticed that there was no one who appeared to be in charge of the ride, no one at its centre controlling its gears and levers as she had seen in the past. Still, as she drew close to it, gradually it started slowing down until it came to a stop, and no longer concerned at how she was the only one there, She stepped up onto the platform and climbed onto one of the horses. And then, as soon as she was settled, the carousel began turning again, and as it went, moving faster and faster, its lights became brighter, its music louder, and, as she closed her eyes, something very strange happened. It felt as though the whole thing was lifting off the ground, rising higher and higher into the sky, and then, when she opened her eyes again, she realized that her horse had come away from its platform and was now flying freely through the air. She looked down and saw the most magical of scenes. The fairground far below her, the lights twinkling as though they were stars in the night sky, while all around it the snowy landscape looked as though it had never been touched, as though the snowflakes had only just fallen. And still she went on, raising her arms from the horse's reins, her hair blowing as she went faster and faster. She flew above miles and miles of beautiful countryside, over rivers and forests, roads and railway tracks. And then, quite without warning, the horse began to falter, its movement becoming erratic and stuttering as though, if it had been a car like the one her father owned, it was running out of petrol. It began to descend down and down, and Catherine began to worry that she and the horse would soon crash into the ground. They seemed to have changed direction and were now descending towards the funfair, the razzle-dazzle and the pirate ship coming closer and closer into view. "What are you going to do?" asked the voice she had heard before, and it was then she realised that it was the voice of Nicholas. "What's going to happen?" I don't know, Catherine said, now becoming quite alarmed. "Perhaps you should have taken more care. Perhaps thought about what might happen before jumping straight onto the horse," Nicholas said. "Yes, I should have thought," Catherine replied. "Well," Nicholas said, "there might be a lesson here. It is all very well being brave and courageous, but it is always important to remember to think carefully about what you are going to do before you actually do it. I'm sorry you had to have that little scare, but you don't want to have any real accidents, do you? How do you think that might make your mother and father feel?" "No, I will, she promised, the suggestions she had heard so often from her mother now, finally, making sense to her. "I will be more careful. I will remember what Mother said." With that, the horse started to slow down, and, as it reached the funfair, it hovered over the carousel until it had spun far enough around for it to return to its previous place. Once she had dismounted, she noticed that her own small carousel model was sitting at the edge of the platform, and jumping down to the ground and picking up the model, she saw that now one of the horses had a tiny person sitting on it, holding on tightly to the reins. "It's me," she said happily, just before the flash of bright light returned her to the toy shop. "It's me, on the carousel. Thank you, Mr. Nicholas, and I promise I will remember to be more careful." The Magical Toy Shop. Part 4. Charlotte. As Charlotte walked towards the curtain with the shimmering stars, she looked again at the snow globe she had picked from the toy shop shelves, remembering the conversation she had with her mother earlier in the day. "I do wish it would snow every day," she had said, watching the falling flakes out of the window. And then thinking, she asked, "Does it snow everywhere?" "No," Madeline had replied. "There are lots of different places all over the world where it never snows. There are places where it doesn't even rain." "That's not fair," Charlotte answered. "Everyone should be able to have snow sometimes, especially at Christmas." She found the flash of white light that surrounded her as she went through the curtain quite startling, but after just a few moments, she found that her fear had passed, and that now she felt calm and comfortable, even though it appeared that she was in a completely darkened room. In fact, the only thing she could see clearly was the snow globe, which had now begun to radiate with a soft, warm light, the tiny house and minuscule tree within it now silhouetted. Not being able to think of anything else she ought to do, she gave the globe a shake and then... Suddenly she was in a completely different place, a place that was very cold, the ground covered in thick snow and ice, the sky filled with endless white clouds. And what were those strange things a little way away? They were unlike anything Charlotte had seen before, a dome of ice with a small entrance protruding at the front. "Hello," said someone behind her, and turning around, she saw that it was another little girl, probably no older than 10 years old, just like her. She was wearing a heavy green parka coat and fur trousers, with fur gloves and a fur hat. Charlotte thought they all looked very warm, and really rather quite liked them. "Hello," she said. My name's Charlotte. I'm Anjij, but people often call me Anne, said Anjij. Could you tell me what those are? Charlotte asked, pointing at the domes of ice. Those? They're called igloos. Many years ago we used to live in them, but now we have different kinds of homes. Those ones over there are new. We just had a competition to see who could build the best one. Was it a competition for Christmas? Charlotte asked, looking around but not seeing any decorations. Yes, sort of, Anjij said. We actually celebrate Kuvia Sukvik, which is a festival that starts on December the 24th and is the beginning of our new year. We have a feast and a Santa Claus parade with floats and a fire engine, and we all get to dress up in costumes. That sounds wonderful, Charlotte said. I'd love to see it. And, with that, suddenly the scene changed, and Charlotte found herself with Anjij at the festival. They were laughing and talking, and having a marvellous time as the different floats passed by. And then, when it grew much darker, they went to her large wooden house and ate something called matak, as well as a delicious soup made of barley, onions, pepper, and bay leaves. Have you seen one of these? Charlotte asked, remembering the snow globe she had put inside the pocket of the parka Anjij had let her borrow. She took it out, gave it a shake, and then... The scene changed again, and now Charlotte was in another new place. A very different kind of place. It was very warm and very sunny, and she was glad she was no longer wearing the big, thick parka, even though she had no idea where it had gone. Hello, said another young girl who looked about the same age as Charlotte. Hello, my name is Charlotte. Would you mind telling me where I am now? Looking slightly confused, the girl said, I'm Dominique and you and I are in the village of Knoll. I've never heard of it, Charlotte admitted, looking around. We're actually in St. Bart's, which is in the Caribbean. Knoll is a village we turn into a magical Christmas place every December, said Dominique. Would you like to look around? You celebrate Christmas, but it's so hot, and there's definitely not any snow. We don't need snow for it to be Christmas, Dominique smiled, leading Charlotte through the village. There were lots of people walking around, and in between, dozens and dozens of stalls and small markets, where Charlotte saw lots of intricate jewellery and all kinds of different food, including something called jerk chicken, plantains, which she thought looked just like the bananas she had learnt about at school. And there were stews and fritters, as well as delicious-looking sweets. We can go sunbathing, Dominique said as they went, stopping at almost every stall to look at all the wonderful things. Or go snorkeling, or go to Shell Beach, where you can't even imagine all the different shells you can find. Or we could go dancing, or... But it's not like any Christmas I've ever known, Charlotte said. To us, Dominique replied, it's exactly like Christmas. It's our Christmas, just as your Christmas is yours. We still do all kinds of the same things. We give each other gifts, we have music and church services, nativity plays and Christmas cards. Just because there isn't any snow, it doesn't mean that it isn't Christmas. It's still the most special time of the year, and it's still the time where it means such a lot to be with the people you love the most. Charlotte nodded, at last understanding that no matter where you were, whether it was snowy or sunny, hot or cold, it could still be Christmas. She looked down at the snow globe again, accidentally disturbing the glitter that began floating around inside the glass. And then, without even realising it, she was back in the toy shop. Hello, said Nicholas cheerfully, as Charlotte saw that she was now standing outside the curtain again. Did you know, she asked, that it doesn't have to snow for it to be Christmas? Yes, Nicholas laughed. Christmas can be celebrated in many different ways, in all sorts of different countries, even where there isn't any snow. The Christmas season can be whatever you would like it to be. As long as it makes you happy, and the people you care about are happy too, then whatever you do, whether it is snowing or whether it is warm and sunny, is by far the best way for you to rejoice. The Magical Toy Shop. Part 5. Mary. Mary shielded her eyes from the bright flash of white light as she went through the curtain of shimmering stars. Her mother had just been talking with her, reminding her what a big girl she was, now that she was 7 years old, how brave and courageous, and how she was so pleased she had chosen the same toy she had taken with her, on her own adventure so many years before. Now, make sure you enjoy yourself, she said, just like I did when I was a little girl, just like you. And remember, there's no need to be scared." Mary did not recognise the place where she suddenly found herself after the bright light had faded. She could see that it must be almost Christmas, since the ground around the small wooden house was covered with snow, and there were paper decorations, flowers, and coloured chains in the windows. "But what am I to do now?" she asked nobody in particular. "Why not try the spinning top?" she heard someone say, although she could not see anyone around. She had almost forgotten she was holding the colourful striped toy in her hands, and, since she could think of nothing better to do, she found the garden path, swept from it a few inches of the powdery snow, and placed the toy onto it. Then, something very unusual happened as soon as it began to spin. Something she had never seen happen before. As it spun, turning faster and faster, it seemed as though the coloured stripes that had been painted onto it had turned into long, fluttering streamers that reached away from the top and twisted into spiralling arcs of light in the air. Mary watched the colours in amazement, and then, as the streamers turned the entire sky into an enormous pattern as though it had become one giant rainbow, she heard voices coming from inside the house. Always an inquisitive child, Mary could not resist going to look in the windows of the house just to see who was there. Perhaps it's Mother, she thought, and maybe she's with Charlotte and Catherine and Arthur, and they're all waiting for me to join them. But, standing on tiptoes as she peeked through the glass, she could see that it wasn't anyone she recognised at all, but instead, it was another little girl, about the same age as her, and she was sitting alone in a small, plain room writing something on a piece of paper. A lady came into the room and, smiling at the little girl, said, "Everything all right, Maddie?" Mary gasped as the little girl turned her head to look at the woman, and she could see that she looked like... that she was just like... that it was her mother, just as she had been when she was a girl. "Yes, Mama," Maddie replied, looking back at her work. "Mother," Mary said, even though she had already decided that most likely she wouldn't be able to hear her. And then, in an instant, she found herself inside the house, sitting close to Maddie, who was now talking with her mother and father. Mary could see that Maddie was drawing a lovely Christmas picture of herself and her parents, standing together in front of a smiling snowman with a large carrot for a nose, and there was a small spinning top just like the one she had brought with her from the toy shop in Maddie's hands. "We are so very sorry," Maddie's mother was saying. "It's just that things have been so difficult this year, with the bad weather and the terrible harvest we have had. There just hasn't been any extra money for us to be able to save anything to buy you a gift this year. We know you have been such a good girl and that you deserve to have the best Christmas, but unfortunately this year, it just isn't something we are able to do." Mary couldn't imagine how upset her mother must have been to hear such news. She looked round at her, wondering what she was going to do. "You mustn't say you're sorry," Maddie said. "I know that things have been difficult this year, and I know it has been especially hard for you. So don't be sorry. We have all the things we need to have a good Christmas because we are here together. And look at all the decorations we've made." Mary looked around the room, seeing the paper flowers and paper chains, and the wreaths made of willow twigs, the stars and moon shapes cut from paper, the garlands of winter flowers hanging across the walls. In the opposite corner of the room stood a small but very bushy Christmas tree, and from its branches hung a few pieces of dried fruit, some more flowers, some shining metal and tin that had been cut into all kinds of different shapes, and a handful of candles, their flames flickering brightly against the late afternoon light. It all looked beautiful, Mary thought, just as beautiful as any tree she had seen while she had been in the busy modern town in which she lived. "Are you certain?" Maddie's father asked. "You're not angry with us?" Maddie rose from her chair, which looked very old and rather uncomfortable, and creaked as she went, and put her arms around her mother and father. "There is nothing else I need in the whole wide world," she said, "as long as I have the two of you. I don't have any need for gifts or anything else, because that isn't what makes Christmas special. What makes it special, what always makes it special, is being with the people that you love, the people who mean the most to you, the people you look forward to seeing when you wake up every single morning, and there is nothing you could ever do that could change that." Mary wiped a single tear from her eye as she watched her own mother and her parents, who she now realised were actually Grammy and grandfather, embrace and then begin laughing together. They started singing carols as the night drew in, and later, after they had eaten their meagre dinner of rabbit and a few vegetables, they played parlour games. Maddie looked as happy as Mary had ever seen her, and it suddenly occurred to her that, as soon as she was back by her mother's side in the magical toy shop, she would give her a big hug and tell her that she loved her very much and that she now understood what Christmas really meant. Then she would gather together Arthur, Catherine and Charlotte and tell them all about her adventure so that they too would be able to see that Christmas wasn't about presents or decorations or extravagant roast dinners, but that it was about being with one another and caring for one another, making sure everyone was happy and promising that they would never change, that they would always look after each other. That's why Christmas is the best time of the whole year, she would tell them, because all we need to do is be together and not worry about anything else at all. The Magical Toy Shop, Part 6, Madeline. Adeline and Nicholas stood together near the entrance of the toy shop, happily watching the 4 children standing in front of the curtain of shimmering silver and gold stars, hugging one another so tightly and for so long it was as if they had been apart for many years, and not just the few minutes it had taken them all to enter and then return from that magical room. "I think they have had an enjoyable time," Nicholas said, smiling to Madeline, "and I also think, if you might allow me to say so, that each of them has learned something important about themselves and about Christmas." "Just as you did for me," Madeline replied, reaching out and taking hold of the elderly man's hand. "I know there really won't be any point in me asking how you have managed to do all of this, and who it is you really are." "Because I won't tell you the answer?" "Well, yes, that's right, but it's only because you don't really want to know, not really. The main thing is that you have 4 very special, very clever children there. 4 children who love you and their father very much and who will always do their best for you." "I never did tell anyone," Madeline said as the children finally began walking back to them. "About what happened on the day you came to see me. I never told a soul, not until I had these wonderful children of my own, and even then, I don't think they ever believed a word of it." Nicholas smiled and said, "Well, perhaps not until today." "Yes," laughed Madeline, "not until today." Just then Mary leapt upon her, grabbing her so firmly around the waist that it almost took her breath away. "Oh, Mother," she gushed, "you'll never believe what happened, where I went and what I saw." "I don't think you should tell me," Madeline replied. "Not yet, not today. In fact, I don't think you should tell anyone about it at all. Just for now, it should just be your secret. But you can tell me. Did you have a nice time? Did you enjoy your adventure?" "I think we all probably learned a lot," said Arthur, who, along with his 2 other sisters, had joined them. "It's certainly given me something to think about." "And me," said Catherine. "Mother, I promise that I won't do anything silly, and that I won't do anything dangerous ever again." "Do you know what I learned?" Charlotte asked. Madeline, smiling as widely as she ever had before, wiped a tear from her eye as she shook her head. "No. What did you learn, my dear?" "I learned that no matter where you are or what you do, Christmas means just the same thing to everyone, all over the whole entire world." "Well, that's lovely," Madeline said, opening her arms so that they could all squeeze together. As they embraced, she watched Nicholas quietly walk away from them, over to the shop counter several feet away, where he bent underneath it to do something Madeline wasn't able to see. After another minute or 2, she told the children to have one last look around the shop, as time was getting on, and they really should be going, so that they would be home when their father returned from work. "We'll all need to get an early night too," she told them as they wandered away, all still holding hands, "since it's Christmas Eve tomorrow, in case you had forgotten, and we still have lots of things to do, preparations to make, and even, if you are very good, some games to play." "But we're always very good, Mother," Mary said, looking back to her over her shoulder. "Yes, you are," Madeline replied. "You always are so very good." When they had walked far enough away, she went over to the counter to see what Nicholas was doing, to ask if he needed any help. "No, thank you," he said, standing again. "Just getting a few things in order. I have a very busy couple of days coming up, you know." He came back to Madeline's side and she took his hand again. "I really don't know how to thank you," she said. "It's been such a surprise seeing you again." Can you tell me, though, what it was that made you decide to come back?" Nicholas thought for a few moments and then said, "I always thought there was something special about you, my dear Maddie. Of course there is something special about every child in the whole world, every single one of them, and even now I still see you as that happy little girl who had so little and asked for even less. Such a joyful, generous heart, such a wonderful little girl. I suppose it's enough to say that I missed seeing you, and just thought it would be nice to take a few moments to come and see you again, and to meet your delightful children." "And how are you?" Madeline wondered. "I don't suppose it's very often anyone ever asks you that." "Me? Oh, I'm fine. And as long as I can continue doing these things, all these things I love to do, then I shall carry on being fine. But thank you for asking. And yes, you're right. It's not often anyone thinks to ask, but then I would never expect them to. Why would they think about an old man like me? At least, not for the majority of the year." "Well, I'm not entirely certain if that's true," Madeline replied. "I know that I think about you quite often, no matter what time of year it is. I'll never forget that afternoon, when you came to our funny little wooden house and sent me on that most brilliant of adventures. I do hope they enjoyed it just as much as I did." "Each one is different," Nicholas said, "and each one is personal to each of them, but yes, I think I can say that they all seem to enjoy their time." It was then that the children came wandering back through the shop. Still holding hands, they all looked very happy and very peaceful. "You don't have your gifts," Madeline said. "Did you leave them somewhere?" "We decided that we don't need them," Arthur said. "We learned that it isn't about the gifts you receive. The important thing is the people who cared enough about you to think about you at this time of year. This shop is filled with the most amazing, the most fantastic, and yes, even preposterous things. But, at the end, they are still only things. This," he continued, gesturing to his sisters and to Madeline herself, "this is what's important. This is what really matters." "You are a very clever young man," Nicholas said, "as are you all very clever and very delightful children. And might I just say, it has been an absolute pleasure meeting you all today, and I very much hope, as you grow and build lives of your own, that I shall someday see each of you again. Now, come along. Let's not keep your mother waiting any longer. It's a busy time, and none of us can afford to stand here nattering our time away like a bunch of old donkeys." They all laughed, and, at Madeline's indication, Arthur opened the shop door and they began filing out behind him. "Thank you again, Nicholas," she said as the children disappeared into the evening. "You really have made this a special Christmas for them, and for me, just as you did so many years ago." "You are very welcome," he said, nodding his head. "And perhaps one day we too shall see each other once again." "I should like that very much," Madeline replied, leaning forward to give him a brief kiss on the cheek. "Oh, I say," he exclaimed with a chuckle. "What on earth would my wife say?" Madeline closed the door behind her and found the children waiting for her by the park gates. "Come along then, you happy lot," she said, and, together, they set off along the snowy paths, heading towards home. As they paused at a curb, waiting for a horse and carriage to pass, Mary said suddenly, "Look, it's gone. The toy shop has gone." They all turned round to see that she was right, that the magical toy shop had completely vanished. "Where do you think it's gone?" Charlotte asked. "I think," Madeline replied, pointing to Charlotte's chest, "that it's just in there, right inside your heart, and if you're very lucky, then that's where it shall always be. I know, because it's been inside mine for 25 years.